by Tom Slater, who's deputy editor of Spiked Online. Let's go through the front pages of the papers today. And I think it's not a surprise after that press conference what a lot of them are leading with. The Sun, 1 in 50 has COVID, grim toll, but jab for 1 in 4 Brits over 80. The Times, millions more vaccines on the way. And also talking about teachers, ex-teachers should check pupil grades. Daily Mail, COVID curbs may be back next winter, which is grim warning. The Daily Telegraph, pharmacies offer to give jabs snubbed by ministers, and a picture of President Trump at a campaign rally. Also, again, that headline, restrictions may still be needed next winter as millions more have virus. The Eye, vaccine hubs to open next week as virus infects 1 in 50. Daily Mirror, 1 in 50 infected and rising. The Guardian, tough curbs for months as 1 in 50 now have virus. And the Daily Express, 1.1 million infected with virus, as 1.3 get jabs. And the Daily Star, shove your dry January. It's a picture of Joanna Lumley and ASFAB as lockdown and the bog roll bandits return. Tom Slater, it is not a surprise that 1 in 50 figure is all over the front pages, isn't it? But again, we often see this data put out at crucial moments to sort of focus the mind. But I think it's interesting quite how many of the papers there have actually also gone with this story about how we could have more restrictions in the winter. I think a lot of people are supporting the current lockdown. Massive support, according to the polls, and even a lot of my family, who people who've had the virus, younger people who aren't that are concerned about their own safety and just want to make sure that older relatives are shielded, are saying, yeah, but it's only for a few weeks. And when you explain to people it's not just for a few weeks, it's going to be months. And even after all over 70s will have been vaccinated, we're told, by mid-January, 86% of deaths being over 70s, we're still going to have restrictions in March, probably April. And Chris Whitty hinted that some restrictions, might have to take place still over the summer and then be brought back in again in the autumn. That's when reality kicks in, doesn't it? This is it forever now.
It certainly seems that way. I mean, we should remember this all started off as a 3-week lockdown to save the NHS. Does anyone remember that? So, I mean, I know things have changed. We've learnt more over that time. But at the same time, there's been a real danger that lockdown just becomes so entrenched in the way that those who govern us want to deal with these issues, to the point where you've got Chris Whitty coming out and talking about maybe needing restrictions next winter, despite the fact that presumably the vulnerable will have been more than sorted out by that point in relation to vaccines, unless he knows something about the vaccine rollout that we don't. And I think that's why it's so important that we push back against this, because so often we're told that this is a temporary thing. So often that proves not to be the case. And what would be even more alarming is if after this pandemic, these kind of unprecedented measures are just seen as almost routine, something that you use if there's winter pressure on the NHS, or if there's another kind of burning climate or other issue that you need to deal with. So and that's why it's so important to challenge
the
this
pressure in terms of, again, I'm not denying that COVID exists, everybody. It's not a hoax. We had a
if you're listening, YouTube.
Thank you. Had a massive, never have. No one on this station has. We're not idiots. But the reality is, if you actually look at where we are in terms of numbers now, we're constantly told, hospitals are massively overcrowded. They are not at any higher capacity than a normal winter crisis. Now, we shouldn't have a normal winter crisis. Other countries that fund their NHSs, their health services better, don't have winter crises every year. That is something that we should be tackling. It's something I've talked about many times before we had COVID. But there is nothing out of the ordinary in terms of the data that is publicly presented about the number of people in hospital, about the number of ICU beds being used, and things like that. Now, you would expect to be seeing that if we were in a situation where we were facing a second wave that was threatening to overwhelm the NHS. Even some of the data that's put out about how, the huge number of more patients that have gone up, something like 40, 50% since Christmas Day. And I looked into the data, and I have to say I was really quite upset to discover that they're choosing Christmas Day because Christmas Day is the day in the winter when you have the fewest people in hospital, because what a surprise, they send lots of people home before Christmas Day because it's a skeleton staff on Christmas Day. So they send lots of people home in the 5 days to Christmas Day, and then lots more people come in or come back post-Christmas Day. And that's why you see that big climb. Anyone you hear using Christmas Day as their benchmark, that is a big red warning sign that they're not perhaps giving you, should we say, the full picture.
It's so important that we, again, kind of dig into all of the claims that are being made, because one of the things that's been most alarming, I think, about this time around is how that climate from April and May is back, where if you say anything to question into the statistics, to talk about is this the right way to go, to raise alarm about any of this stuff, you're a denier, you're being reckless, you've got blood on your hands. That climate is really back with a vengeance, and that therefore it's so much more important than ever that we do hold not just the government but also the scientists and officials to account for the claims that they are making, because as we've seen time and time again over the course of this pandemic, of course it's within their interest to make us as fearful as possible in order to get their policy through. But again, we can't just give up our right to criticise in this situation, because the scale of the threat is too important.
And again, all I want to see is the data that backs up the claims. And again, I've been hearing from very senior figures in London hospitals, and they've sent me figures who don't want to be identified because they're scared of speaking out, saying they don't believe that the problem is as big as is being made out as being. I mean, it's winter and there are people dying, no question at all. But there is a concern that some of these claims are not backed up by the data. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the proof of what people are saying. Just finally, and very, very briefly, schools possibly not being back before autumn. Boris Johnson was asked, could he clearly state children would be back before the summer holidays? I can't believe someone even asked that. I would have thought the Easter holidays would have been the question. And he could not even confirm that. That would mean children missing a year of school. That's just child abuse, isn't it?
I mean, this is one of the things that show we've completely lost the plot. I mean, a nation that is unable to educate its children because of a virus that doesn't actually affect them has completely lost it, as far as I'm concerned. And the fact that Boris Johnson can even give a straight answer on that question, I think, is shameful. This is one of the most shameful things of this entire pandemic, is the way that we've treated school children, particularly those from the most deprived background.
Yeah, I have to say, if that doesn't wake people up, I don't know what else will. It's Tom Slater. It's going to be a pleasure having you joining us all this morning. Lots of top guests, including the vaccine czar, Vaccine Minister Nadhim Zahawi as well. We'll be talking to lots of top guests throughout